It's episode 198 of the Security Weekly News on the 25th of March. This is the wrap-up show for the week of 20 March 2022. We've got Deepfakes, supply chain, Lapsus, Russian indictments, North Korea, and more. All this in the show wrap-ups on the Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
All right, I'm Doug White, and this is the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up Show, episode 198. This week on the Application Security Weekly number 189, John and Lee had Alvaro Munoz, the principal security researcher at GitHub, on the show. Alvaro was on to talk about past research that they had been doing, like JNDI injection, unsafe deserialization, struts, remote code execution, and other projects that they've worked on, as well as a whole bunch of open source security topics. So a pretty interesting segment there. In the second segment, they had the AppSec news. On Business Security Weekly number 255, Jason Matt and Tyler Robinson had Alessia Klevchuk, the principal product marketing manager at Barracuda, on the show. And Alessia was on to talk about recent trends in social engineering. And they talked about like methods, the best practice for you to take to try to defend against this kind of stuff, and other information about the most common of threats, without any doubt. Social engineering is probably the earliest threats that we ever saw in technology, and continues to be a massive issue. So a good show to check out. And in their second segment, they had the business security news. On Enterprise Security Weekly 266, Adrian Cady and Tyler Shield had Zane Bond, the director of product management at Keeper Security, on the show. Zane was on talking about how to secure network secrets. We've always had that old password shadow file issue that's been going on since the dawn of Unix and or Linux anyway. And they were talking about that. 75% of all ransomware attacks involve credential stuffing. And as such, how do you manage all the secrets on your network? Obviously, I'm going to talk about Okta in a bit and all these kind of problems. They did go on to talk about the Keeper Secrets Manager, which is a cloud-based manager of, secrets. And that tool manages API keys, database passwords, and all this kind of stuff. It's basically the modern manifestation of my old red cards approach that we used to recommend when we audited people, that they keep all these, critical, mission critical kinds of things on red cards in the vault, so that there was a way to recover these things when they really, really needed to, if something happened. In the second segment, Aaron Keneally, the global director of cyber insurance at SentinelOne, was on. Aaron was on talking about how ransomware and other cyber incidents may be a wake-up call for the cyber insurance industry, and that industry needs to really adapt and figure out how to actually transfer the risk from cyber incidents, because we saw a lot of cyber insurance stuff come out early with very big policy limitations and things like that, and then we saw this ransomware start up back in 2020, and very large losses due to this. So interesting segment as well. In the third segment, the Enterprise Security News. On Security Weekly News number 197, Jason Wood was on to talk about a really cool story about the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States, actually punishing somebody, and that somebody being Cafe Press, and they gave them a fine. Okay, well, companies figure fines into the cost of doing business, but this time they actually required the FTC to oversee the company for 20 years. I mean, this was because of their heinous disregard for security time and time again. So you want to punish somebody, put a government agency in charge of them. Now that's a punishment. On Paul's Security Weekly, number 733. First up was Stephen Ward, the CMO at Source Defense. Stephen was on talking about a lot of different types of attacks. I mean, there was quite a bit of stuff discussed there. But they were particularly interested in talking about third-party vendors being attacked. And I'm going to talk about that in my rants today, and I guess a lot of this, related to Okta and so forth, but was providing real-world examples of what's going on and things like that. They did talk about how to mitigate some of these threats, so an interesting segment with Stephen. In the second segment, they had the Security Weekly News, and in the third segment, well, our old friend and generally all-around awesome person, Dave Kennedy, was on, and Dave is the CEO at TrustedSec, and was talking about Trevor C2, which is a framework for stealthy C2 communications. Always fun segments with Dave, all references to Trevor, always appreciated. The Trevor reference came from DerbyCon years ago and so on, but has been a persistent meme. So check that one out if you missed it. The threat of the week for me, then, is going to be third parties. And I'm sure I've talked about this before, but this was based on Okta. And as everybody has seen, and we've been reporting, on Tuesday we talked about this as well. But obviously Okta was compromised by a third party, and truthfully, we've been seeing this for a long time, but it was never maybe as much in the front seat as it is now. Doing your own security is difficult. Doing your own security when you're a company that cooks sausages that you want to deliver to a U.S. airbase in a van can be really, really difficult. Doing security when you don't really have any staff, budget, or even an understanding of security, you really just know how to cook sausages, is just about impossible. But that really is what these supply chain type of attacks have come to be. The more security we put on the front door of the bank, well, the more important it is that if you want to break into the bank, that you can go climb in a ground floor window on the back side of the bank while the guards are looking at that a trash fire in the parking lot. Becomes a thing. Okta allowed a third-party engineer who was, I guess, a contractor. It just said third party, so I presume that means a contractor, but to have super user access, which, all of us that have been consultants and third parties for years have at some point had super user access, and apparently they didn't really monitor it very well. The account of the third party was compromised somehow, presumably with credential stuffing, probably using that anyway. And, it really, really damaged Okta's reputation now, as more than 350 companies worldwide have been notified that they have some unknown level of potential compromise. I'm not sure what the total number of possible accounts would be, since they were able to use apparently password resets to access other, to reset the passwords for the accounts. And Okta manages your sign-ons. So you have that Okta tools in your organization, and whoever this was that accessed the account, and they had access to it for more than a few days, like 5-6 days they had access to this account. And if they reset those accounts, they could, of course, use them and get into these companies, without triggering any alerts, because the reset happened on Okta's side, and then they could go log into your company and do whatever they want to do, because if they had access to admin accounts and so forth, which they probably did, who knows what all they've done. I think it's going to be massive fallout, like think The Road by Cormac McCarthy, if you're trying to, think about like the most grim thing imaginable. Now, over the years, we've seen all sorts of compromise, and I will go back to the sausage truck thing. Just for sake of discussion, let's say there's a secure facility that belongs to a very large military organization, and they have to eat, right? So your little sausage truck business agrees, we could provide a bunch of sausages to the people on this facility. Well, that means that the sausage, the driver, the cooks, the substitute driver, everybody in the whole organization needs to get into that secure facility, whether they get in physically in the truck or they're getting in through, being carried into the facility by things on the truck, by the food itself, et cetera, et cetera. So when you hire consultants that are going to help you to try to figure out the security of this, and the consultants are advising you that your drivers are a large number of different people from day to day who all use the same ID because it's easier that way, and maybe some of them are not exactly holding work permits or have passports from other countries and so on and so on and so on, but they all use the same ID because it's just easy, right? They have an ID hanging in the truck, they pull up to the facility and they show the ID and they let them in. And and it's like, wait, that sounds like a problem. And the consultants then turn around and tell you, well, you're going to have to vet every single one of these people, and they all have to have their own IDs, and the trucks have to be vetted, and the sausages have to be vetted, and so on and so forth. And then they tell you, well, we don't actually cook the sausages here. We just deliver them. They're actually cooked by this guy named Rolf, who has a warehouse on the other side of town where we pick them up. And he has a whole bunch of employees who sometimes also drive our trucks if our driver's not available, and so forth and so on. It was very gig economy kind of thing a long time ago. And then you look at the sausages, and the sausages are actually made in Bulgaria, and then they're driven in trucks from Bulgaria to another country, and then their computer system, well, that's interlinked in Bulgaria, it's interlinked in another country, and all the trucks are rented from a guy who was a former Stasi agent, but he's totally legit now. I mean, that was before the fall of the Berlin Wall, and so on. Well, pretty soon it starts to dawn on you that maybe it's just not going to work. I mean, this is very true of all these small and mid-sized companies, especially manufacturers, because that is one of the original supply chain things, right? You want to build a car. You've got parts being made by dozens of different small companies all over the place that all consolidate those things and put them in shipments, and they're brought here and there. And then, they don't necessarily have any IT staff, but they did put a computer in because they were required to, and that connects to the systems at the facility because they want to get orders, but that system's sitting in a small room that has no door, and anybody can just walk in off the street and sit down while everybody's off in the afternoon. Well, you add all those same suppliers up, and, all those small suppliers had to send everybody home a couple of years ago, right? And you won't ever put that gin back in the bottle, ever. So now there's an infinite series of RDP and VPN accesses. They've all got access portals set up across the cloud that plugs into a truck washing facility, that plugs into the truck company, that plugs into the sausage factory, that plugs into the airbase. And it's all getting to be just a bit much. I mean, when I was doing that consulting, I couldn't believe it. And that was a long time ago. Today, it's a lot worse. I mean, you may have the most secure operation in the whole world, but if that vending machine in the lobby of your building is connected to your Wi-Fi, or even if it's connected to cellular, and that company gets compromised, it could be a big mess because your employees are using their badges to buy drinks out of a vending machine, and then all of a sudden you're Okta. Of course, Okta's is a lot worse because the offsite person had super user access that wasn't being monitored in any sound way. Now, I've been a third-party vendor for a lot of different people, and I could go down in my basement and pull all these old files out and see just how many times I had this same conversation with people. So you want me to do this remotely, right? Okay, and you want to set up a login for me? Sure, that sounds reasonable. Well, and then they tell you, oh, just SSH into this server and you can access all the routers. And I'm like, okay. What's you going to give me credentials? Yeah, your username is router user and the password is Sam is a pita. What? Now, I didn't know what pita was then. I thought it was like this yummy bread that I like. I mean, and I still do too much. But then they told me Sam was the CIO and pita was an acronym, not bread. And I was like, what? It's an acronym for what? And they were like, pain in the ass. And I was like, so why is that my password? And can I reset that? And they were like, oh, no, you shouldn't reset it because all the network people use that same account. I was like, what? I mean, and they're like, no, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Well, it's fine until my laptop gets stolen or I leave it sitting open in a Starbucks somewhere in Texas or another dozen scenarios we could come up with. Honestly, I'm kind of at a loss. I mean, the solution is not simple, nor is it cheap. I mean, it starts with zero trust, but I mean, it extends way beyond that. I guess, well, if you think of zero trust in a global context, but I mean, it starts with that zero trust on an account, but it extends into APIs. I mean, how many APIs have you got right now? And how many of those APIs have tokens that they're being used to access other sites? And how many sites are accessing you? It goes up and down that physical and virtual supply chain across the organization, abroad the organization, east, west, north, south, all those things. And it's going to require a lot of expensive changes to not just equipment, but to ideology. And I mean, you're going to have attitude adjustments for a lot of people who won't ever allow any kind of change unless they get a direct hack that they can show, if we'd done this, and then they fire somebody, and then they maybe try to make an improvement to it. It's just going to keep happening. I mean, I've seen schools where a third-party supplier has access to the network, and they can directly access everything in that network because they only have 2 passwords, and they give them out to every single vendor that provides anything to the school. And I saw one where that same password was the password that was used on every root account on every server in that school system, and they never cleaned it up. When a vendor gets fired, or they quit, or they get a different vendor, or that vendor fires someone, they all have that password. And when I was telling them, you really should set a password for each individual user, they were like, we don't have the staff for that. I mean, the vendors have vendors, and the vendors have vendors have vendors, and the vendors' vendors and the vendors' vendors' vendors all provide for the other vendors. And pretty soon it's just sort of an infinite number of monkeys with an infinite number of spin writers, and somebody's going to guess the damn password. I mean, remember spin writers? Wow, those are really old and awful. I hated those things. I thought that was the single most wasteful thing I'd ever seen in my life. If you don't know what a spin writer is, you're welcome to look it up. Although I guess it could be porn, but surely there's not a spin writer porn site. I don't know. Anyway, so what are we going to do? Well, I guess we just keep plugging holes for now. And for every leak, we stop another, with our plug, another dozen leaks open up somewhere else. And, pretty soon we're just running around with our hands cut off. Does anybody have a solution to this? Anyone? Bueller? No? Okay, enough. Now the news. Lapsus announced that some of its members were on vacation. This was a tweet they put out. They said their members were on vacation until 30 March in a tweet where they said they might be quiet for some times. And it said times, so, I mean, Lapsus is pretty famous for, sort of broken English kind of tweets. The article says that based on their Telegram chats, there are members who speak English, Russian, Turkish, German, and Portuguese, and it's a gang of unknown total size. Makes sense. So the City of London Police, and the city is a part of London, so I know it sounds like the City of London, but it's actually a sub-part of the city. It's the city in the city. But the City of London Police have arrested 7 members of the Lapsus gang, allegedly, yesterday. The police did not release any names, but they said that the ages of the members arrested range from 16 to 21 years. I don't know why they released that, but they don't release any names. But, it's like, okay. But and that the case is related to a hacking group. It did not specify Lapsus, but that's what everybody pretty much believing that it is. It's believed that one of the arrested people is a member of Lapsus that goes by White Breach Base, and that person has been doxxed by other fighting groups with Lapsus as a 17-year-old person from Oxford, England. Lapsus has leaked source code and other data from NVIDIA, Samsung, Microsoft, Okta, Ubisoft, Vodafone, and Mercado in the past. So a big case that's developing there against Lapsus. The United States indicted 4 Russian government employees in relation to other hacking, which apparently targeted hundreds of companies from the energy sector between 2012 and 2018. The Department of Justice said that the hacking campaigns targeted thousands of computers at hundreds of different companies in approximately 135 countries. The charges were filed against one employee of the Russian Federation Central Scientific Research Institute of Chemistry and Mechanics. Now, there's a mouthful. Maybe in Russian it works a little better. And there were 3 other employees of the Russian Federal Security Service that was all indicted in this. The 4 members were allegedly behind multiple attacks which targeted ICS and SCADA systems in the energy sector and included oil and gas companies, nuclear power plants, utility companies, and power transmission companies. The first campaign that was run was called Dragonfly, or Havocs, and was run between 2012 and 2014 and infiltrated multiple ICS and SCADA systems using infected legitimate software updates which contained Havoc's rat. The group used spear phishing and watering hole attacks in that particular campaign, and they were able to infect more than 17,000 unique devices in the U.S. and worldwide. Between 2014 and 2017, they ran another campaign called Dragonfly 2.0, which used spear phishing to target over 3,300 users at more than 500 U.S. and international companies, which included U.S. government agencies, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and others in this campaign. The U.S. Department of State is offering up to $10 million as a reward for any information which leads to the identification or location of state-sponsored Russian hackers targeting U.S. critical infrastructure. So, hey, if you want to make some money. All right. I hate ransomware gangs. You hate ransomware gangs. We all hate ransomware gangs, unless we're in ransomware gangs, in which case we hate other ransomware gangs. But, well, the FBI said that ransomware gangs have breached the networks of at least 649 organizations in U.S. infrastructure. So this is a very narrow group. U.S. infrastructure in just the last year. In a report that came out called the Internet Crime Complaint Center 2021 Internet Crime Report. Wow. Another mouthful. The article says the actual number is probably quite a bit higher, though, because the FBI did not start tracking ransomware incidents in critical infrastructure sectors until June of 2021. Prior to that, you had to go down to the basement at Quantico and see Spooky Mulder to investigate. But since they started tracking it, they had 649 reports. So that was just like half a year. And, of course, not everybody calls the FBI either. The top gangs on their leaderboard were Conti, who had 87 victims, Lockbit with 58, Revel Sodinokibi with 51. The FBI doesn't encourage paying ransoms since, as ever, ransoms don't necessarily help you, and that they may leak your data anyway, or they may just take your money and then either re-ransomware you again and then demand more money, or they may just take your money and then say, hey, that wasn't enough. We want double that. The FBI did say that it expected an increase in critical infrastructure victimization in 2022. In 2021 report, they said there were 847,376 individual complaints of suspected internet crime, which is up 7% since 2020. And the reported losses in 2021 exceeded $6.9 billion US dollars. The top three cyber crimes reported in the report were phishing, non-payment, non-delivery scams, and personal data breaches. Google Tag published data that two distinct North Korean hacker groups separately used a Chrome browser zero-day flaw in an organized malware campaign. The vulnerability they were using is CVE 2022-0609, which was patched last month by Google. Tag said that they suspect that these groups work for the same entity with a shared supply chain because they all had access to this same 0-day, but they were doing different things. So they used the same exploit kit, but each of these groups operated with a different mission set, and they deployed different techniques. They went on to say that other North Korean government-backed attackers have access to these same exploit kits as well. One of the campaigns they reported on showed that the APT had targeted more than 250 individuals working at news media, domain registrars, web hosting providers, and software vendors around the world. The emails claim in that particular campaign, the emails were coming from Disney, Google, Oracle, and others, and they claimed that they contained very, very cool job opportunities at these big companies. The links were spoofed legitimate job hunting websites, of course, like Indeed or ZipRecruiter, and these links had, of course, drive-by browser malware downloads on them. North Korean APTs have been caught in the past targeting security researchers. They've used fake pen testing companies to social engineer victims, and they have been targeting cryptocurrency platforms recently. So expect more from them. And they fired a intercontinental ballistic missile recently that apparently didn't blow up on the launch pad. So they're North Korea tired of Putin getting all the press. Two big names in the tech world died this week. Stephen Wilhite, a programmer who invented the GIF, and insisted that it be pronounced GIF, like the peanut butter. Wilhite, when anyone mentioned that the GIF pronunciation was inconsistent or illogical, were simply told, you are wrong, in the finest programmer fashion. The GIF, I'm going to say it that way, the GIF was created in 1987 as a way to enable the display of images on CompuServe, if you've ever used that. And when animated GIFs were implemented in 2000, well, they became a massive feature of the internet. going forward. The other big tech death this week was John Roach. Roach basically saw kit computers back in the 1970s. We all remember some of those fun things like Heath kits and stuff like that, and felt there really ought to be a market for some kind of a home computer that was pre-built. John set out to do this and in turn built the TRS-80, which was sold by Tandy and Radio Shack for $599.95 in 1977. We all had them. I remember asking my dad for $599 so I could buy a TRS-80, and my dad said, what is that, and why should I pay for it? The Trash 80, as it was lovingly referred to, came with 4K of RAM, supported basic programming, and had a 64-character per line monitor, and wait for it, a cassette tape drive that was used for storage. Yep, good old cassette tape. I remember this thing taking about 30 minutes to load a 10-line program. It was awesome. I loved that thing. The TRS-80 had the largest selection of software available for purchase by 1979, but by the mid-1980s, the Model 4D was the last one made, and it was only then available by special order until about 1991. As a side note, Tandy Computers did employ Bill Gates and Paul Allen as young pups, so they kind of got their start there. Those were the days of miracles and wonders, so RIP, guys, or should I say jies. Sorry, Stephen, I just can't let it Joe. Yeah. And finally, a deep fake of President Zelensky, of the beleaguered president of the Ukraine, appeared last week with the president telling his troops to lay down their arms and surrender. The video was uploaded to a hacked Ukrainian news website. A certified response from the president was quickly posted where he called it a childish provocation and telling the Russians to just go home. Really, Russians, just come on, go home, all right? Enough. This needs to stop. But I think this case illustrates how we really do need to focus on the development of methods to authenticate legitimate and repudiate false information quickly, because this is just going to keep happening. Agencies all around the world are using these techniques to promote conflict, and there is no doubt that it's being done constantly on social media and in many more subtle ways as well. As this is pretty overt and, as he said, childish provocation, but I think there's a lot more of this subtle stuff being pushed out there. I think this is going to be a big part of our lives for a while, and the war in the Ukraine is just going to continue to underscore that we do need to keep focus on the misinformation and how we prevent this and how we authenticate all this stuff. Or soon, maybe already, we're just not going to know what is the truth and have any way to discern between two people telling us two completely different things. Probably already going on. I don't know. But like I said, Russians, please just go home, all right? Keep up the good work over there, Aaron. And that's a wrap-up for the week of 20 March 2022. I'm Doug White. See you next week on the Security Weekly News.